Dust clung to the morning air like smoke, stirred by boots and hooves in the crowded yard. The auction house was alive with a rough kind of energy, men shouting bids, horses shifting in their pens, the smell of sweat and hay rising sharp beneath the late summer sun. Elias kept his hat low, shadowing his eyes, though the fatigue on his face was plain. He had come with one thought: buy a strong horse, something he could hitch to his work, and perhaps drag his failing ranch back from the edge. His pockets held little more than hope. He'd sold tools, even parted with his father's saddle, just to gather enough for a single bid. Every coin felt like a lifeline tied to his future. Around him, ranchers laughed, men with deeper purses and polished boots, voices carrying the confidence of those who never knew desperation. Elias ignored them, his gaze fixed on the line of horses waiting their turn. One in particular caught his eye, a tall bay stallion, muscles rippling beneath a sleek coat, eyes sharp with fire. That horse looked like survival carved in flesh and bone. Elias whispered under his breath, willing it to be within reach. If he could take that one home, maybe the fences would stand again. Maybe the herd could be driven with pride instead of shame. The auctioneer barked out numbers, his cadence a rhythm Elias had grown to hate. Faster and faster, the bids rose. Elias stepped forward, lifted his hand at just the right moment, heart pounding. A cheer burst from the crowd when the gavel slammed, and for a brief instant he thought he had done it. He thought the bay stallion was his. But when the dust settled and the papers were shoved into his hand, a murmur ran through the yard. Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. The horse being led toward him was not the stallion at all, but a gaunt, scarred creature, ribs jutting beneath a dull gray coat, mane tangled like weeds. Its eyes rolled white, and it jerked against the rope as if every hand near it carried pain. Elias froze. "That's not mine," he muttered. But the clerk only shrugged. The number matched, the bid was sealed. Some mix-up in the shouting, some slip in the papers, and now this pitiful beast was tethered to his fate. "Fine deal you got," a man sneered, spitting tobacco in the dirt. "Should have kept your money for feed, Mercer." Another laughed, calling it the sorriest animal they'd ever seen. Elias's jaw clenched. Heat burned in his chest, not at the horse, not even at the mistake, but at the laughter. Every chuckle felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of his pride. He could have walked away. He could have left the animal standing there and carried his shame back home empty-handed. But when his gaze fell on the horse again, something shifted. Beneath the trembling hide and scars, the animal's eyes met his. Not pleading, not soft, but fierce, like a spark buried under ash. It was a look Elias recognized too well, a look he had seen in the mirror after nights of failure and mornings of dragging himself back to work despite it all. The rope was pressed into his hand. The horse yanked once, nearly throwing him off balance, but Elias held firm. "Come on, then," he muttered. His voice was low, rough with resentment, yet steady. The laughter followed him all the way out of the yard, but he did not look back. On the road home, dust rose in thin trails behind their steps. The horse lagged, stumbling often, and Elias's anger flared again. What use was such an animal? He needed strength, not another mouth to feed. But each time he thought of turning around, of demanding his money back, he caught that flash in the creature's eye. It was not gentleness. It was defiance, raw and unyielding. By the time the ranch came into sight, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in long streaks of fire. Elias stopped at the gate, staring at the broken fences, the weeds in the pasture, the silence where once there had been life. He looked at the horse. This mistake he had paid for with everything left in his pocket. A bitter laugh escaped him, though there was no humor in it. "Maybe you're just like me," he said quietly. The horse flicked an ear, restless but listening. Elias led it inside, the gate creaking shut behind them. It was not triumph he felt, nor even acceptance. only the weight of a choice that could not be undone, and the faintest tremor of something else beneath it. Something he would not yet name. The night settled over the ranch, and with it came the uneasy truth. The wrong horse was his, and nothing would ever be the same. The ranch greeted them with silence, the kind that made every broken fence and empty stall echo louder. Elias led the horse into the corral, though calling it a corral was generous. Posts leaned, rails sagged, weeds pushed through the dirt. The place was a mirror of himself. Weather-beaten, still standing but barely. The animal balked at the gate, whites of its eyes flashing as though it had stepped into another prison. Elias tugged the rope, not unkindly, but with the steady insistence of a man too tired to argue. The horse yielded, though each step trembled with mistrust. He poured a measure of grain into a trough, listening to the soft rattle of kernels. The smell alone should have drawn the animal forward, but it stood rigid, nostrils flaring, body taut as wire. Elias crouched a few feet away, elbows resting on his knees, watching. Hunger battled fear in those restless eyes, and fear won. The grain lay untouched, shadows deepening as the sun slid west. Later, by lantern light, Elias tried again. This time he set the bucket down and turned his back, leaning against the fence as if he had no interest at all. Minutes passed, broken only by the creak of wood and the distant sigh of wind through the grass. At last, hooves shifted, hesitant. Elias did not move. A soft crunch followed, tentative and almost guilty. The horse was eating. He closed his eyes, relief mixing with a strange ache he could not name. Days bled together. Work filled his hours, mending fence lines, patching leaks in the roof, clearing weeds. Always, the gray horse lingered at the edges, watching. Sometimes Elias spoke aloud, not because he expected response, but because silence pressed too hard against his chest. "This place was better once," he said one afternoon, hammering a post straight. "Had help, had hands to lift more than just mine. Then folks left, storms came, and what was left of me came apart." He glanced at the horse, ears flicked in his direction. "Guess you know what that feels like." The horse grew no prettier, but it grew steadier. Its ribs softened beneath Elias's feeding. Its coat lost some of its dullness. Still, it flinched at sudden motion, shied from touch. Elias learned patience. He moved slowly, kept his hands visible, let the creature measure each step. At night, when the lantern flickered low, he sometimes reached out, palm open. Most nights the horse retreated. But once, just once, its muzzle brushed his skin, quick as a breath before pulling away. The contact was fleeting, but it lit something inside him that had long been dark. Neighbors noticed. At the general store, someone snorted, "Mercer feeding scraps to a lost cause." Another added, "That nag won't haul a wagon, let alone save a ranch." Elias held his tongue. Once he might have argued, but words meant little against the slow, quiet work of trust. He let them laugh. At home, under open sky, he saw progress invisible to others. A horse that no longer trembled at his shadow, that lingered near instead of fleeing. One evening, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm crawling across the horizon. Elias stood by the fence, watching the dark line creep closer. The horse paced inside, restless, hooves drumming the dirt. He felt a kinship in that unease. Storms had chased him his whole life, breaking what he tried to hold together. He pressed a hand to the rail, whispering, "We'll weather this one." As if answering, the horse stilled, its ears turned forward, gaze fixed on him. For the first time, there was no wildness in its eyes, only recognition. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that made Elias's breath catch. The storm broke, rain hissing through the grass, lightning carving the sky. Elias lingered in the barn doorway, lantern casting a thin glow. Inside the corral, the horse stood unmoving, watching him as though tethered by more than rope. Something unseen had shifted between them. A fragile thread stretched taut against the howl of wind. He felt it settle deep, a promise neither of them had spoken. When the thunder eased, Elias drew the lantern close and whispered into the night. "Maybe you weren't the wrong one after all." Morning came sharp and cold, the kind of chill that cut through sleeves and set teeth on edge. Elias rose early, as always, and found the gray horse waiting at the fence, its breath misting in the air. That silent presence had become habit now, a shadow stitched into the rhythm of his days. He no longer called the animal it. In his thoughts he had begun to think of the horse as Ashen, a name whispered like smoke. Naming felt dangerous, yet it was already done. He forked hay into the trough, the scrape of tines against wood breaking the stillness. Ashen stepped forward without the hesitation of weeks before, muzzle dipping into the feed as though routine had carved a fragile truce. Elias leaned on the rail, chewing on his thoughts more than breakfast. His ranch still sagged with ruin. Fences leaned, pasture thinned, barns begged repair. One horse, especially this horse, could not change all of that. And yet, Elias found himself anchored by its presence, pulled back from the hollow edge where loneliness once consumed him. The sound of boots crunching gravel drew his attention. A man approached from the road, tall and weathered, coat patched from long use. His eyes flicked to Ashen and widened with recognition. Elias straightened, wary. Strangers rarely came without reason. "You got that one at auction?" the man asked, his voice roughened by dust and years. Elias nodded slowly. "Mistake in the bidding. Ended up mine." The stranger's gaze lingered on Ashen, unreadable. "That's no ordinary horse. Belonged once to a rider named Carver. Man pushed him past breaking. Rode him in contests, races, hard drives. When an accident near crippled the beast, Carver walked away, said the animal was cursed. Folks believed him." Elias glanced at Ashen, who chewed steadily, indifferent to the telling. "Cursed," he repeated, tasting the word like ash. "They called him loyal once," the man continued, eyes narrowing. "Said he'd follow Carver through fire. But loyalty only goes so far when met with betrayal." He shifted his stance, voice softening. "I can take him off your hands. Won't fetch much, but you'll be rid of his burden." For a moment, Elias felt the weight of temptation. Selling the horse could put food on the table, maybe patch the roof before winter. Practical sense clawed at him, urging surrender. But when he looked again at Ashen, ribs softening, eyes calmer than before, something inside him stiffened. "No," Elias said, the word low but final. "He stays." The stranger studied him a moment longer, then tipped his hat and turned back toward the road. His figure dwindled against the pale horizon until only dust remained. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That evening, he led Ashen into the open pasture. The horse tossed its head, nostrils flaring at the sudden space. Elias spoke softly, guiding with rope and patience, but Ashen bolted, hooves tearing up clods of earth. Elias followed, not with anger but with steady persistence. Every stumble, every sudden lurch tested his resolve. Neighbors watching from afar would have mocked the sight. One man chasing a hopeless cause. Yet each time Ashen slowed, Elias was there, not demanding, not striking, simply present. By twilight, sweat darkened the horse's hide, and Elias's legs shook with exhaustion. Yet progress had been made. When he raised his hand, Ashen stopped, sides heaving, eyes locked to his. Not submission, not fear, recognition, sharp as a spark. Elias felt the air shift between them, a fragile bridge rising from ruin. That night, sitting by the lantern in his cabin, Elias rubbed the scar across his brow and thought of the word cursed. He remembered battles where men abandoned one another, promises splintered by fear. He remembered being left behind when strength failed him. The horse's story was his own, carved in different flesh. Both discarded, both unwanted, both still standing. Rain began tapping the roof, gentle at first, then swelling. Elias leaned back, listening. Outside, Ashen shifted in the corral, hooves steady despite the storm. Elias whispered into the dark, "We'll prove them wrong." The words bound him as much as the horse, a vow stitched by thunder. The storm came without mercy, rolling over the plains like a living thing. Clouds split with light, rain slashed sideways, and the wind howled as though it meant to tear the land apart. Elias stumbled from the cabin when the first fence gave way, the splintered rails crashing down beneath the pressure of cattle pressing wild against them. Shadows surged in the rain, his herd scattering toward the ravine that cut sharp and deep across the edge of his land. If they plunged there, he would lose everything. Ashen stood restless in the corral, eyes flashing white, hooves pounding a rhythm of fear. Elias hesitated for only a heartbeat. He had never mounted the gray horse, never dared trust the fragile truce they had built. But there was no time left for caution. He swung the gate open, rope clenched in his fist, and stepped forward. "It's you and me," he shouted over the storm. The horse snorted, ears pinned, but when Elias reached for the reins, Ashen did not bolt. Climbing onto the scarred back felt like climbing into fate itself. The horse tensed beneath him, muscles taut as bowstrings, then lunged forward into the rain. Elias clung to the mane, his body moving in desperate rhythm, every bone rattled by the thunder of hooves. The herd loomed ahead, cattle bawling, rushing blind toward ruin. Elias pressed his heels and leaned low, voice raw with command. "Hiya, Ashen! Turn them!" They cut through mud and shadow, driving themselves into the teeth of danger. Ashen's speed was raw, unpracticed, but it carried the weight of something long buried. The horse surged alongside the herd, pressing its body to theirs, pushing them back from the cliff's edge. Elias shouted, waved his arm, felt the pounding chaos swallow him whole. For a moment, he thought it was hopeless. Then Ashen screamed, a sound that split the storm itself, fierce and wild. The herd faltered, veered, turned as though commanded by that cry alone. Mud splashed, hooves churned, and slowly, impossibly, the cattle shifted back towards safe ground. Elias's throat burned, his heart hammered, but he did not let go. He felt Ashen beneath him. No longer a broken animal, no longer cursed, but something resurrected, something bound to him by the fire of survival. They reached the ravine's edge just as the last stragglers were turned. Ashen skidded to a halt, mud flying, muscles shaking from the effort. Elias leaned forward, one hand on the damp mane, whispering, "Easy, boy, easy." The horse heaved, chest rising and falling like bellows, but it did not flee. Instead, it stood steady on the brink, hooves inches from disaster, awaiting his word. The rain eased to a drizzle, the storm crawling away as if defeated. Elias dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the sodden ground. He turned to face Ashen, laying a hand against the trembling flank. "You saved them," he said softly, though the truth hung heavier. "You saved me too." By morning, word had spread. Neighbors who once sneered now came with hushed voices, eyes full of something close to respect. They spoke of the cursed horse that had turned a herd from death, of the man who had ridden through a storm with nothing but grit and faith. Elias listened in silence, his hand resting on Ashen's neck, letting their words wash over him like another kind of rain. When the last visitor left, he stood alone in the pasture, the sky stretched wide and clean above. Ashen grazed nearby, calm, ears flicking lazily. Elias watched him, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth. What he had thought a mistake had become his salvation. The wrong horse had carried the right truth. Sometimes fate delivered its gifts wrapped in ruin. He whispered into the open air, not needing an answer. "Maybe you were never wrong at all." The wind carried his words across the field, and Ashen lifted his head, eyes steady, as though he had heard.